Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to understand and know your soul, then do we have the Things That Join the Sea and the Sky show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mark Nepo, the author of at least 19 books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Book of Awakening, the author of The One Life We're Given, and one of the most profound and beautiful books I've ever read on light and life, Things That Join the Sea and the Sky. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about his field notes on living and how you can learn to journal to touch your soul. That, plus we'll talk about Jimmy Heath and sax, tongues and cicadas, Zuzu and thunderstorms, Sisyphus and wakefulness, grandmother's toaster, and what in the world a flatfish has to do with anything. So welcome, gotcha. Welcome back to the show, Mark. Are you ready to shine?
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you again, Michael. I appreciate it.
It is so amazing to have you back here, Mark. You know, I never thought of the connection until right beforehand when I was saying this is a cross between Merton and Thoreau. But this is such an incredibly beautiful and profound book. I want to dive a little bit into the book, and I want to dive into how you got there through your journaling. Before we do that, can you give us the briefest Mark Nepo 101?
Sure. What do you mean about this book and how it came to me?
No, even beforehand. So we've had several interviews. People can go back and listen to the whole history of you. But maybe the briefest snapshot. We are not our stories. That's so important for people to know. But there is a golden thread we followed to get here. How'd you get here?
Well, thank you for that. I think the simplest way to offer that is to say, like everyone, I was born with a life force and a gift, which took me a while to find and introduce myself to. Mm-hmm. And because the way that I understood the world very naturally was visually, metaphor has always come to me very easily. That's the language of how I understand life. And what does that mean? That means that patterns speak to me. Mm-hmm. That when wind goes through a tree, it's also telling me how do other things go through us? How do things go between us? So it's always been, and so long before I had any language or labels, I was learning through metaphor. And so when I was alone, I was never alone. Mm-hmm. And, I think that, and then fast forward a little bit to what being in school and thrown into the world of relationships and identity and figuring that out. And so, I think in high school, like everyone, I had my first love. I fell in love. And after, an amazing experience, she went on to fall in love with someone else. And so my heart was broken. And so in order to get through that, that was the first time I started to actually write. Mm-hmm. And after I started to heal, I realized I wasn't just talking to myself. That, as the Sufis say, we polish the mirror that we polish the heart into a mirror. Mm-hmm. And I would add into a window, both. And so by expressing ourselves honestly and by doing that for the first time, I realized I wasn't just having a conversation with myself. I had begun a conversation with the universe. And so, as you know from some of our other conversations, in my mid-30s, I came to go through a very difficult near-death cancer experience with a rare form of lymphoma. And so that left me here, blessed to be here at all. That left me really accepting and understanding that there was nowhere to go, that the miracle is always wherever we are, at the heart. Now, that doesn't mean we don't do things and go places, but we think we have goals and ambitions and dreams, and we do, mm-hmm. But often the deeper reward for them is that they ignite us to the gift within us, the light within us, and then to the light that's within everything. So I wound up through that journey becoming a student of all paths. And I also became a student of the heart, because from that point forward, my mind has served my heart and not the other way around. So when we get to this book, I have journaled my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me talk for a moment about the difference between, in my mind, between a diary and between journaling.
Thank you.
Diary is an outward record of our comings and goings, of our events, of who we talk to, of what we do day to day, kind of a record of our days. But a journal is the place where we have an ongoing conversation with the universe. It's a place where we continue to ask questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about questions and my understanding of questions, and where they lead us into this ongoing listening, deep listening to all the other forms of life that come alive as they come through us. And so this book is taken 15 years of journaling, and I've taken, I think about 145 instances where they have triggered ahas, or they're places I've been stuck, or they're places I've had to deal with grief or wonder, or they're places where, I've had to circle back more than once to try to understand something. And then also, Carl Jung spoke about that artists and writers are lightning rods for the unconscious. And so often when we can be thoroughly who we are, the life force from others and the stories of others come in. And so sometimes there's just stories that have come through that I trust and record. So I've taken these 145 depth spots and worked with them further to bring forward as much as I can. And that's what makes up the book. And as you know, that in the back of the book, there's a section on journaling, about what journaling is and guidelines for how to move into that space. And I love questions, and wherever I teach, I've just gathered questions, so I offer 100 journal questions to get us started in the back of the book.
So it's profound. I love that when I get up each morning, I do a brief meditation. I go to my desk, and for the next 30 minutes to an hour and a half, I'm having a conversation. With whom? I couldn't tell you. The words go out and bounce around, and I'm throwing out all sorts of questions, and I'm getting lectured, and we're just going back and forth. Who's the we? I couldn't tell you. And that seems like the process, in a sense, of what you've gone through, which is a process of inquiry and self-discovery.
Yeah, and I think that this is, apart from writing, why I share this process is because this is essential to living, to introspection, to how we move in the world. I just happen to write it down. You don't really have to write it down. You don't have to save it. But we do need to be in this conversation. Mm-hmm. We do need to find a way to, I think about it this way. We all know that we need to breathe constantly. You have to inhale and exhale. And you can't just inhale only or exhale only. It won't work. And likewise, the heart has to feel and express. The mind has to perceive and express. Mm-hmm. And so that's the heart's way, that's the soul's way of inhaling and exhaling. So apart from whatever we might, quote, create or shape or produce, that's not really what it's about. What it's really about is how to healthfully find a way for the soul to breathe. And having this a space where you can have a conversation, ongoing conversation with everything that's larger than you, mm-hmm. I have found is a really healthy way to do that. In all the meditation traditions, thousands of years, people are invited to work and practice on their breathing. Mm-hmm. It's not so they become great breathers. It's so that they become clear vessels of life. Mm-hmm. And likewise, when we journal, the goal isn't to become great writers. It's to become a clear vessel for the life force that moves through your heart, in and out with the rest of life and the world.
Can you talk more about that with us? Because when I read this, and there's a book I'm working on for future years called The Open-Hearted Warrior, what I get is a complete sense, at least in the journaling, of shields down and experiencing the rawness in all of its aspects of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in this aspect, and this is in all of what I explore in all my books. Being vulnerable is the strength.
Yes.
It is, the shield is really our transparency. Now, yes, we have to, quote, protect ourselves physically in the world, but in the inner world, that protection that we assume in the outer world gets in the way. So in the outer world, we need in the world of circumstance is what I mean by the outer world, in the surface world, which we live in both. There's no, there are philosophies throughout history of people who, wanted to say, okay, I want out of here. I don't want to be in the outer world. I want to transcend. We have the transcendentalists and the extreme romantics. And then we have, folks who have been so battered by the outer world, they say that's all there is. Mm-hmm. The nihilists or existentialists, or today's modern version is the ultimate pragmatist who's made pragmatism a religion. But we live in both. It's all one. And so our job as human beings, as souls and bodies and time on earth, is how do we let outer in and how do we let inner out? Because that's where we become connectors to other life forms, and that's how we become holy, WHOLELY, holy, and HOLY, who we are. So when we're out in the life of circumstance, we have to have a skill of risk management. Mm-hmm. That means if you and I are having this conversation and we're walking in New York City and we're so deeply involved as we get when we talk and we don't pay attention and get hit by a truck, that's risk management. Yeah. You have to be able to maneuver through circumstance in order to have these conversations. In the inner plane, we need, in order to do self-discovery and grow, we need risk enhancement. We need risk enhancement, which means being vulnerable, which means putting the shields down, which means being transparent and as truthful as we can possibly be with our own experience so that we become a clear window or mirror to experiencing others. And it's understandable that we have to learn how to do both. Just like you need two good legs to walk. Mm-hmm. You need risk enhancement on the inner plane and risk management on the outer plane. And it's very understandable that often we confuse those. So sometimes when we are touched by feelings we don't understand, we think we've got to put shields up, when actually we've got to put them down even further. And journaling, writing, expressing, I talk about it as the life of expression, mm-hmm. of which journaling is one form. It could be dialogue. It could be sketching while you meditate. Really, you can find your own form of expression, but we have to express. And that familiarizes us with risk enhancement. It says, hey, okay, this is all right. My first reflex was to clutch and close up, but actually I'm finding, oh no, not only can I relax, I need to relax and open up so I can see through my lens into the lens of life.
So when you're talking about risk enhancement, when I read through this, one of the things that struck me is, it's a strange way to put it, the beauty in the difficulty in people who are struggling in life, who are people who are at their end in life, people who do not even remember their life. And yet by leaning into it, maybe that's what you're talking about with risk enhancement, by leaning into life, going through that lens, you see a beauty in it.
Yes, there's a beauty in everything. We go back to, let's go for a moment to John Keats.
Hmm.
Um, the wonderful, and we mostly know John Keats as, oh God, we had to read that poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, in high school. But the story of John Keats is so, John Keats was like the Mickey Mantle of poets. Mickey Mantle was this amazing Hall of Fame baseball player who, in his very first year as a rookie, he tore his knee up. And so we have no idea how great he would have been had he had healthy knees. And John Keats died at the age of 24
Wow.
from tuberculosis. Now, here was a young man who was so gifted. He had already become a doctor by the age of 24,
Hmm.
and was at his heart a poet. And now he started to get ill, and reaching into the difficulty that was thrust upon him, as I experienced through my cancer journey, which we should just say can be anything. It doesn't have to be illness. It can be anything that opens us up, including beauty and wonder and sudden love and being cared for. But here's John Keats, and he's this remarkably sensitive man who's growing by leaps and bounds, because he is not only, as in his early 20s,
Hmm.
being exposed to life for the first time, but he's also being thrust into the depth of life because he's faced difficulty and through his illness. And so he's starting to realize, I'm starting to open up to a depth, and my eyes are being transformed, and I'm not going to have time to even express myself in this new way. It's not going to happen. And so he goes to Rome and stays in a friend's apartment on the Spanish Steps in Rome, which is where he wound up dying. And in his days, his last weeks, he's sitting there and he sees, an urn, a Grecian urn. It's where he's staying. And understandably, what does he? He says, "Oh man, if I could just stop all this. I'm running out of time. Life is difficult, and yet I know there's so much more. If I could just stop all this." And that's when he writes, "Oh, if I could just be on the urn and not be subject to the erosion of time, and to my body wearing out, and to time eating me up so quickly." And so he writes this really lament at having to be used up by time. And we wouldn't even read that poem except at the very end. And I share this whole story because of what you asked, but also because it's a great example of the power of journaling and the life of expression. So he gets to the end of the poem, and if he hadn't had a aha, we wouldn't even know that poem.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, through no planning of him, he shares the real feelings of where he is in the life that he was given and not having enough time. And all of a sudden, he gets to the end and he makes this leap and he goes, the only two things you're going to know in life are beauty and truth and beauty. That's all you'll know, and that's all you'll need to know. And that's the aha, the leap that he makes. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, I wasn't there to ask him, but all I can do is say what it means to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not A equals B, B equals A. The truth of beauty is one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty of truth is another. The truth of beauty is what restores us. It's what enlivens us. It's what brings us into wonder.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of truth isn't always, quote, beautiful.
Right.
The beauty of the truth of the Holocaust, you wouldn't really call that beautiful, but what's the beauty of it is the stark rawness that we can never forget what we as human beings are capable of when we lose our soul. And so this roughness, this rawness, he's saying that's what you need. That's all you're going to ever see in life is beauty and truth. And if you have these two, you'll be okay. So there's another story I can tell about. I'll wait. We'll save it for a little bit. But it's the story of Beethoven, who is another amazing example of where honest authentic expression helps us transform ourselves into who we really are. But you go ahead first.
No, you've got it. If you're going
Okay.
Beethoven, you got to
All
go
right.
Beethoven.
All right. I write about this in my book, 7,000 Ways to Listen. So Beethoven, just imagine, Beethoven went completely deaf by the time he was in his late 20s.
Yeah.
Now, imagine, here is a man, and I think of Beethoven as one of my heroes because I feel he was an ordinary person carrying an extraordinary gift. And that's what made him heroic to me. He was born with this capacity to retrieve and bring into the world music that had never been conceived of, ever. And by the time he's 28, he'll never hear it played. You imagine. Imagine. So here he is, in 1802, he's at a crisis point. He's at a very dark point in his life where he's realizing this. He's realizing he's completely losing his hearing. And he's also realizing that he's retrieving the most amazing music. And that's what he's put here to do. And it's tearing him up. He's depressed. He takes a week and he goes to a small town outside of Vienna called Heiligenstadt, where his family had a cottage. And he goes there, quote, on a, quote, retreat. But secretly in his own heart, he's contemplating suicide because this is so, so hard. And he doesn't know how he's going to do this. And he gets there and he starts to write a suicide note, which we now have, and it's called the Heiligenstadt Testament. He writes this letter in which, just like Keats, he's just lamenting what life has given him. There's no great conclusion. He's just saying, oh man, I'm birthing all this stuff and I'm never going to be able to hear it played. I don't know how to live with this. And somehow by the reward for being that honest about his despair is by the end of the letter, he doesn't conclude that he's going to commit suicide. Instead, he says, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to make the most music I can with what I have for as long as I can. And he folds the letter up. He goes back to Vienna. And Michael, he begins a decade of writing masterpieces. He puts the letter in his desk drawer, never to be found until after his death in his 50s by one of his brothers. It's remarkable. And both Keats and Beethoven, not as artists, as people faced with what life gave them, through this life of expression that they found, it empowered them and transformed them to be who they were, not who they thought they were going to be.
It's huge, and there's no way to resist this. A mighty woohoo! I had tears during that one. I was coaching earlier today, and I was coaching somebody from Holland. And for some reason, I thought that he was about to mention Anne Frank and visiting Anne Frank's home. He didn't. But then I went back to your book, and you did. And I'm going, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. But there is somebody, when it comes to journaling and comes to expression and it comes to finding meaning by diving into inquiry and the word.
Yeah, and Anne Frank as you know, I wrote a piece in there from my visit to the Anne Frank house. And so here is this 13-year-old girl who the light of her soul was a flicker in the midst of this age of insanity. And again, it's just such a powerful example. Let me read you a piece from the book.
Sure.
So this is let me find it here. Oh yeah, okay, I know where it is. There we go. Yeah, this is called The Symmetry of Kindness. And this was a story that just kind of came through. And part of our job when we're receiving, when we go, I feel like when we can be, I don't go looking for the stories.
Right.
I'm trying to be honest and authentic about my own experience, my own questions, my own feelings. And that's like polishing that window. And when the window gets clear enough, then other life comes through. And again, we don't have to write about this. This happens to us when we are authentic in our own life. Then we suddenly start having dreams about other lives. So this was a story that came through called The Symmetry of Kindness. The train slammed into the station, injuring hundreds. The engineer was critically hurt. People toppled over each other, bouncing across seats and against windows. There was blood and glass everywhere. One woman shimmied her way to the platform when part of the station ceiling fell, pinning her. She thought she would die. Then the hands of fellow passengers lifted her one to another, and she was saved. Later, she wanted to say thank you, but didn't know who to thank. Once on the mend, she retrieved a list of those who were with her that day. Now, one by one, she looks them up, asking if they had helped her. Each of them smiles and says no. Once with them, she can see what each needs, and so she helps them along. She unpacks groceries for an old woman, listens to a widower's story, and gives a single mom her umbrella. This has gone on for weeks. She keeps trying to find those who helped her, only to help those she finds. Finally, it occurs to her that this is God's symmetry of kindness. She will never know who helped her, so she can thank and help everyone she meets along the way.
Beautiful.
And thank you. And so the reward for retrieving that story, first the kind of work to be open to retrieve that story was not looking for it, but just being true about my own feelings. Mm-hmm. The reward for retrieving that work is I got that insight. I didn't know that before I retrieved that story. I didn't know that this is God's symmetry, that we won't know who helps us so that we can just help everyone.
Yeah.
That was the reward for journaling and being in conversation with life and retrieving that story, which gave me that insight.
Woohoo! So let's talk about this process of inquiry and journaling. And
sure.
how do we, I guess the most basic question, I guess I want to ask, how do we begin? But how do you begin?
Well, it's really about being present and listening. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is being present, which all the meditation practices invite. In fact, a lot of ways, I do what meditation practices invite, except instead of dropping thoughts, I take notes. So, it's being present and then following, trusting whatever shows up. It might be a question. It might be an image. It might be a feeling. It might be something I've longed for that I'll never have. It might be thinking about someone that I'm no longer in contact with. It might be wondering about Antarctica, or places I haven't been. Who knows? But whatever it is, following that, like treating it as that something, someone, some part of life force is showing up when we're present and quiet and listening to begin a conversation. And so it's our job to follow that and not extinguish it prematurely, not to say, oh, that's crazy. Oh, that makes no sense. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's scary. Oh, why dream about that? I'll never go there. So it's to suspend all of our excuses and constructs so that we can listen and respond. and listen and respond. And writing or journaling is one of the ways that we're given to do that, to explore that. So in more practical ways, I think that there are several, I would really, and I recommend this in the back of the book, that, I think first off, the first thing is, it may seem like overwhelming. Someone might say, well, how can I do this? I'm not a writer. I don't do this. And that's a really nice story, but I'd never come up with that. Well, the first thing is to just make space. We brush our teeth every day. What does it take? 5 minutes? So, and we don't think about it because it's now part of our routine. So the commitment to make it a small part of our inner routine, just as you said, you get up every day. Some part in our day that's good. Everybody has a different rhythm. Some part in our day to set aside 10 minutes. That's all. Yeah. 10 minutes to be present with a journal. I'll talk about that in a minute. And to listen, to be still, and be ready to be in conversation. And the thing is, if you just do 10 minutes a day, which is hardly anything, I guarantee that the 10 minutes will spill into 15. And, so it's like you make root, when you dig a trench for water. Once the water comes in, now you have a stream. Mm-hmm. You don't have to dig every time you go. Now you can go and drink from the stream. So the first thing is to make space for the stream. And then just honor it. Honor it by practicing it. So now more physically, I would recommend that folks get something that you like to hold, a journal. I think there's a lot of beautiful journals these days. Sometimes if they're too beautiful, it can say, oh, I don't want to write in it. It's so beautiful. I don't want to cross out in it. So, there's everything from just a regular notebook to beautiful, I have all kinds. And some people like, writing on the computer, like whatever work, or some people like dictating into, or orally. It doesn't matter, like whatever feels comfortable. But I would say try to make it something that you have a personal connection with. A journal that you like, a form that you really like, that you'll want to return to, a pen that you like to hold. I don't like lined paper. Yeah. So I don't have any, all my journals are completely without lines. And allow yourself, so then how do we go to it? Well, there are at least 3 regular ways that I would recommend for people to work with your journal. One is simply that, to sit down, as we're just saying, to take 10 minutes, still yourself, listen. And, you talked about automatic writing. I talk about it as, writing without filters. Yeah. Writing so that, our minds, like we have we get our TV through our cable through a satellite dish here in Michigan. And so, there's 700 channels. Well, our heart and mind have infinite channels. And we often, because it seems chaotic to us, mm-hmm. we often say, wait a minute, I'm getting confused. That's too many things going in my mind at once. Rather than to develop some comfort and some familiarity with all the different channels that are coming through us. And not just to say, oh, that's chaotic. No, it's plentiful. Mm. It's because we're not used to it that it's chaotic. It's just like, people often who are very, in our society, who are very mind-driven, will talk about that the opposite of being rational is being irrational. Well, no, the opposite of rational is intuitive. That's only naming what you don't understand or are uncomfortable with in terms of what you are comfortable, which is closed-minded, closed-hearted. So our job is to stay open-hearted. Mm-hmm. And so if our heart or mind skips, if I start to write about our conversation and the next thing I know, I'm writing about, a flock of birds in a tree, It's not my job to say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. My job is to follow the tangent and see where it goes, because then it presents something larger than our understanding, and it's our job to connect the dots. Now we're in a conversation. Mm-hmm. So there's a basic trust. So that's one way. A second way to enter journals is as we read, or as we listen to music, or as we view art, I again offer that we treat those as conversations. So that I read often, and I will stop and write in a journal as if what I read was said to me and I'm responding. And sometimes when I'm writing, and I learned this very intuitively on one of my first books. I learned this intuitively in one of my first books. I was exploring a question, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, I said, I wonder what Carl Jung thought about this. I wonder what Emerson thought about this. I wonder what Anais Nin thought about this. And so then I pulled books off of my library shelf at home, and just intuitively I opened them and read a few paragraphs of each.
Cool.
And, more often than not, they all are connecting and speaking to my question. So now I'm weaving and responding. So I invite, and just also our very emotional, heartfelt response to stories we read, to stories we see and hear. And then the third way is by exploring questions. And as I mentioned, I have 100 journal questions in the back of this book, which I've gathered from years of teaching. And so let me say a word about questions.
Sure.
Questions, we talked about inner and outer worlds. In the world of circumstance, questions have answers. What's the proper link I need to put in order to make this call work? What in the grocery store there is a proper answer for which, the items in the cleaning aisle are not edible, and I need to know that. But again, in the inner world, the questions that matter have no answers. We don't ask questions there for answers. We ask questions to open up relationship. We ask questions the way we would open a door that we would like to walk through with someone. We ask questions the way we would swing a lantern to see a few more feet in the dark. So not just the questions I ask, but really I would also invite people to keep a space in their journal where they simply write questions down to go back and interact with at another time.
Beautiful. First off, I guess we need to ask an example of a question to which would build relationship rather than need a specific answer.
Oh my God, anything. Let me give you, I'll just, pull one from the back of the book. There's, so let's see here. Well, which would you rather be, a mirror or a window, and why? Another one, do you want power? What kind and why? What do you think power will do for you? A third one, describe a situation in which you gave of yourself deeply without giving yourself away. What did this feel like? What did you learn? One more.
Yeah.
Do you try to control the life around you, or do you immerse yourself in the life around you? What are the advantages and liabilities of both?
Thank you. It sounds like with each of these questions, one thing that becomes very important that you were already talking about is suspending judgment. There is no wrong here.
Absolutely. There is no wrong. I mean, one of the lines I wrote in the Book of Awakening is there are no wrong choices, only unexpected paths. And I think that's true. I mean, yes, I can make a choice that doesn't work out well, like I choose to step where it's icy and I fall and I hurt myself. But even that's not a wrong choice. It's an unexpected path in which I'm asked to stay in relationship. We're always asked to stay in relationship. The harshness of life pushes us back. And one of our jobs is to continue to lean in after we're pushed back.
Could it be said that staying in a relationship and staying awake or aware or present are synonymous?
Yes, absolutely. One of the other things that has come to me is a line in one of my poems that says, those who wake are the students. Those who stay awake are the teachers. How we take turns. How we take turns.
Amen. Before, you were mentioning something that had to do with emotion, or the word scared wasn't used, but it's in my question, but I linked it to this. Journaling is sometimes considered frightening or scary. What will I find on the inside? Oh no, what happens if I open this Pandora's box?
Yeah. Well, I think that, one of the things there that is that the truth is, D.H. Lawrence has a poem called Self-Protection, in which he basically puts forward the notion, he says, which is really self-protection, hiding who we are or being who we are. And so it's understandable that when we haven't looked at something, we feel nervous about it. That's, to hold all these things without judgment and with self-compassion. Proverbially, you don't look in the closet and the boogeyman in the closet gets bigger. And when you open the door, it takes a while for our eyes to adjust to the light, or the darkness appears to get less dark. Well, what's in the closet hasn't changed. It's our eyes that are adjusting. And so the truth is that often I know that what works inside me, when I'm afraid of it, it's already happened. If I'm afraid of being sad, I'm probably already sad. If I'm afraid things are going to change, things have already changed. And the best thing to do is to take a look and see, because seeing what is one of the greatest gifts we have and requires a quiet courage. So I think that, we need to honor timing. If it doesn't feel, if you begin to journal and it feels scary, well, you don't need to push it. Come back to it later. Go, take the time you need and go as slow as you need. But everything within us, whether it's painful or difficult, is true and helpful and life-giving. It's looking away from it that empowers fear.
Thank you so much. I tend to talk with people, both coaching and our automatic writing program, about when the shoulda, woulda, couldas of life come up and the negative words come out, to actually get them all out on the paper. That's an important part of the process. What would you tell people when they dive in and what they hear is not out of the positive thought, new thought movement?
Well, I think the important thing is to be as specific as possible, because the truth is, words like good or bad, true or false, up or down, in or out, right or left, they're not helpful because they're not specific enough. So, if I look at something and I feel, I feel it makes me feel bad about myself, well, what specifically am I feeling? What specifically am I seeing that doesn't match up with how I'd like to see myself? Without judgment. To start to make practice. See, without judgment doesn't mean without specificity.
Okay.
Without insight, without perception. It actually, without judgment, allows us to be more specific and to retrieve greater insight. So I would offer that once we have those rushes of fear or like quote, negative feelings. Negative and positive are really not helpful at all. I don't even think of, I try not to really even go to those judgments because they paint everything into a corner.
Yeah.
And so part of the word respect means to look again. So when you feel that something is negative or troublesome or, it may be difficult. I'm not painting a pie in the sky view of this. But when we look at even what's difficult, we respect ourselves when we look again.
It's huge.
So when you feel it, no one's going to be exempt from feeling, ooh, that didn't feel good, or I don't want to see myself that way, or I'm afraid of that, or that hurts when I think about how that friend who I thought was a friend betrayed me. Look again and respect yourself. Look more closely. It doesn't have to be done all at once. You can do it and follow your heart's timing, but you respect yourself the more deeply you look to see how these things came to be and how they have shaped you so that you have a better sense of how to move forward.
When you phrase it that way, that was beautiful too. It sounds like this is a practice, and I want to get back to practice in a moment with some few more guidelines. A practice of self-kindness and compassion.
Yeah, which does not mean that we only look at the good things in ourselves.
Yeah.
Or that we prop ourselves up. No, compassion and kindness, especially to oneself, is holding ourselves as human beings with limits, and accepting the truth of what we do and what we don't do, and what we don't do well. Until you accept that you don't do something well, you can't aspire to do it better.
That makes sense. You say that working with your journal is you say to work with your journal like the bar and mirror a dancer works with.
Yeah, it's a daily practice, and again, that's why it's important not to assume my form of journaling, but to, if any of this speaks to you or any of our listeners, to discover your own and what feels good to you, so that it's a space you want to return to, a space where you practice being a living part in a living universe. And as soon as we accept that, there are infinite relationships. What kind of part am I in what kind of living universe? And how do I interact with everything that's not me? And how does it affect everything that is me? So this becomes a space, a very flexible and durable space in which to practice that conversation.
Beautiful. Can you share with us a few other guidelines to help us start to do this dance?
I can talk about the ways of doing this, but everybody has to kind of inhabit their own version of them.
Perfect.
So I think the regular time, the choosing a space and a form that speaks to you, practicing being present and listening, responding, getting in the habit of listening and responding to what you experience as if it's a conversation, which I believe it is. When you are stopped by a piece of art or a moment, you look down an alley where the light is on a building in a city, that's a piece of art that no one has painted yet. So when life presents you that, stop and be in conversation with it. Listen to it, notice what it raises in you, and explore in your journal what that feels like. What is it that piece of life is trying to say to you? So that's the big thing, is to be in open and willing conversation with everything you encounter.
One of the ones that seems important to me, and this is another stopping block for people getting started, is form versus content, because oftentimes we're so indoctrinated from maybe our scholastic years that we have to write well, that it has to be perfect, that we can't even have typos, that we can get stuck in wanting it to come out well rather than just to let it flow.
Yeah, and I think that that's a huge inhibitor, and it's something, there's a great story. But before I tell that story, I just want to say to this that some of the greatest journals in history, Leonardo da Vinci's journals are like an absolute mess, a beautiful mess.
Mm-hmm.
Drawings, sketches, writing over the drawings, sideways, upside down, lines going here and there. Blake, when he wrote Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, we have a draft of it in one of his journals. And there's that poem, which has become a classic, and there's a big X through it. So he clearly was, had second thoughts, but he didn't throw it out, and he left it there for us to discover with the X going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a famous Zen story about a master calligrapher who is asked to design the gate that would be the welcome gate to the city of Kyoto. And so he gets his best student, who has now become a teacher, to help partner with him, to be his assistant as he does this. So, before it's going to be made into iron, he gets huge pieces of paper and he puts it on the ground and is drafting what that might be, what it would look like. So the first thing he does, this amazing, beautiful, with one sweep, and over his shoulder is his student turned teacher, and he looks and he tips his head. He goes, "Well," and the student goes, "Too big." So the master does it again, and again he looks to the student. The student goes, "Too small." So after dozens of attempts, finally, none of them that really look right to the student turned teacher, the master says, "You know what? We're going to take a break." And they start to walk away, and he says, "You go ahead," to the student turned teacher. And then he goes back, and without anyone looking over his shoulder, he closes his eyes, and in one uninterrupted stroke, he creates the perfect gateway to the city of Kyoto. And so, we all have this watcher. And, the powerful part of the story is that student turned teacher was taught by the master. He learned that criticism
Mm-hmm.
from him. So there's a part in us that is always an inner critic, a watcher, that is always trying to move things down a notch. And it's our job to take the judgment out of that watcher so that we can keep growing and experiencing and moving forward.
It's beautiful, and it summarizes almost everything in that he had to go from up here. I like to call this the radio station of KEGO. Think, 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 think. Drop down to K-Heart Radio. Shut that sucker off up there and just let it rip, let it ride.
Yeah.
So a few key wrap-up questions for people, and then a brief passage at the end. First off, I want to take my coaching hat off. I want to give it to you, Mark. What one homework assignment would you give people so that they're not leaving thinking, "Oh yeah, someday that was really good," that they take action on this today?
Well, it's really up. I mean, I can offer that, but it's really up to everyone if they're moved. And so my invitation is to, just begin. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't wait till you find the perfect journal or the perfect time. Just set aside 10 minutes, sit before a window, still yourself, and start. And it doesn't, don't wait for something beautiful to write about. Write about whatever you see. If you see, insects eating at the trunk of a tree, then write about insects eating at the trunk of a tree. And what is that saying to you about life and about your own life? And are there places that you feel life is eating at you in your trunk? So, just begin. Just do it. Just, start the conversation.
Woohoo! And those bugs, those ants, they're going abundance.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
What advice would you give parents to help their kids maybe start in this process of becoming scribblers?
Well, the first thing is to honor, I would say, that they have something to say, that they do see, that what they see and hear is valuable. So I would start by asking them questions. What did you see today? What did you hear today? What did you see and hear from things that don't speak like we do? How did it make you feel? What do you think about that? So I would, in a way, offer parents the encouragement to start to create that little space for kids in which they begin to naturally have their own conversation with the universe.
It's brilliant, and it brings up an interesting question, which is, first off, I'm thinking what they're going to write in many ways is going to be so cool, so incredibly cool. But do we want to also give them the space that they don't need to share?
Oh, absolutely. But I think often, to the first thing is to validate and see. There's a custom. I end the Book of Awakening with this passage, and there's a custom still practiced in Africa among African Bushmen. And when someone goes out to hunt or gather for their tribe, when they start to come back, they are seen. When the first person in the tribe sees them, they point and they say, "I see you." Mm-hmm. And the person seen holds their hand up and says, "I am here." And I think that's a fundamental thing we need to do for each other. We need to say, "I see you," so we can say, "I am here." And part of that is inviting people, especially young people, to start to express themselves without judgment, without turning it into something, without saying you need to make it into a product, mm-hmm. but simply to say, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you think of all those things?
Woohoo! And on that note, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Oh, well, it is it being in that moment of aliveness where I am discovering connection with other life, whether that be, people or my dog who's asleep here.
Behind you to the right.
Behind me to the right, you can see her. Good.
That made my day.
Or it's the snow that's lately falling out the window as we're talking. That's what gives me is that connection of aliveness.
Beautiful. So on that note, where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful, beautiful book? And I guess you also have many, many upcoming events.
Yeah, thank you. So, I have two websites that have all kinds of things about my work and where I'll be speaking and teaching. One is marknepo.com, and the other is 3intentions.com, all spelled out as one word. 3intentions.com. And, my books are available everywhere. You can find these on Amazon or anywhere, really. And I do have, I have a full schedule coming up. Actually, a couple of things. So next week, I'll be in Portland, Oregon at the New Thought Center for Spiritual Living, mm-hmm. which is just outside of Portland. And I'll be doing on the 16th and 17th of February an evening talk and conversation, and then a day-long workshop. And in April 6th and 7th, I'll be in New York City again at a wonderful salon, which is housed in ABC Carpet and Home. It's just above Union Square. And it's beautiful. I've taught there before, and it's a wonderful space with wonderful people. So if you check my website, also I would just add too, Michael, that I offer, I teach a year-long journey where for a small group of people, 30 people, that meets 4 weekends a year.
Cool.
And there's information that is open for the group that will begin this October. Registrations are now open, and details about that are on my website.
Fantastic. So if you didn't catch all that, come on over to marknepo.com and 3intentions spelt out.com. Then come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to marknepo.com and 3intentions spelt out.com. So before we go into a passage here at the end, this has been, first off, this has been brilliant, Mark, and much more than I could have expected, because you not only gave people the path to go down, and it will be their own unique path, but you gave them such, your books to me are candy. Not easy candy, but it's candy nonetheless. And you gave people candy here today, Mark.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So any last words of wisdom or candy you want to share with people today?
Yeah, let me share one small passage from this book. It's called "This Is How." When we can open our hearts and work with what we're given, loving what's before us, life stays possible. Then, through effort and grace, we do what we can with what we have. And when exhausted by all that's in the way, we're faced with the chance to accept and love what's left, which is everything. This is how we discover that heaven is on earth.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Mark. And may everybody then start diving into the words, diving into inquiry, and find their own heaven on earth.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I'll enjoy to be together again.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get things that join the sea and the sky, and begin creating your own field notes today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Brilliant, Mark. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Well, thank you, Michael, and good luck with all your good work, too.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!